Okay, so this presentation can help you in different ways. First of all, it can help you decide whether you might be interested in joining a role in estimation in the future. Uh, while if you were already working on site, this presentation should help you understand the project estimate. Each project is working on an estimate, and in order to understand it, uh, you've got to have like the basics of estimation. It will also help you prepare simple cost estimates on site for variation orders, and it will help you to better assist the estimator from your place or job on site. So, what's the definition of cost estimate? What's a cost estimate? You will find infinite number of definitions for the cost estimate, but these are a couple of definitions that I like. It's a summation of individual cost elements using established methods and valid data to estimate the future costs of a project based on what is known today. An estimate is also an educated guess at what a job may cost. I'm stressing here uh, on the words based on what is known today, because an estimate today might not be equal to what we calculate tomorrow or the day after, or let's say next month or the month before. Prices of resources go up and down, whether it's materials, plant, labor, and so on. As we said, it's an educated guess of what a job may cost. If you're working in a department of, let's say, 10 or 20 estimators, and you give them all the same tender to price, each one of them will eventually get a different total for this estimate. We're not talking about major differences, of course. If they work for the same company, the difference should be in the range of, let's say, 5 to 7%, not more. But still, they will be different. Okay, so cost estimate classifications. Now you can prepare what we call the order of magnitude. It's something we estimators usually prepare when we first receive a tender, with the aim of reporting back to the management what size of tender should they expect. Is it a $10 million or $100 million or $1 billion? So uh, this is, let's say, ideal when little or no design information is available. Um, and, and as we said, it's used by the top management to decide on whether to to go for the tender or not to go for the tender, whether it's too small for the company or maybe just too big. We use like rules of thumb to arrive at this order of magnitude. For an example, like in the area I work for in the Middle East, it's like constructing a bridge costs around $1,600 a square meter. That's inclusive of everything, like the concrete, the rebar, the asphalt on top, everything. So this should be enough to give you just a picture or an idea of the order of magnitude for a tender. Okay, now if we have a bit of more information, call it some design plans or some specifications, then this should allow us to prepare a preliminary estimate. Uh, if we have full tender documents, drawings, BOQ, and this stuff, we can prepare a definitive cost estimate. Uh, okay. Different types of tenders. I'm listing here let's say the top 6 used types of tenders, at least in our area, in the Middle East area, where these are remeasured, lump sum tenders, cost plus, unit rate contracts, BOT, build, operate and transfer, and PPP, public-private partnership. Now, in terms of percentages, percentage-wise, I mean for tenders in the Middle East, I would say maybe 70 to 80% of tenders are remeasured, and again another 10 to 15% are lump sum, while all the other 4 types of tenders don't make more than 5 to 10% of the total tenders floated each year. So by far the remeasured and lump sum tenders are the most popular in this region. Okay, now let's talk about the differences between the commercial and technical submissions. As you might know already, a tender submission, when you work on a tender for like, let's say, a month or 2 months, eventually what we get is a commercial submission and a technical submission. So preparing a tender is much more than just filling a BOQ. There's just a list of items that have to be all answered and fulfilled in order for you as a contractor to get a high score and eventually try to win the tender. So as we can see here, commercially, we have the BOQ and form of tender to be filled, while technically we have a very long list of items that have to be submitted, prepared thoroughly, in detail, in order to score high. A method statement, schedule of works, organization chart, CVs for your key staff, your plant list showing what equipment your company owns and will be deployed for this project, and what other equipment you're planning to hire or rent from the local market. Bidders' financial statements, bidders' similar experience, tender bond issuance, and list of preferred subcontractors. Okay, now preparing a tender requires input from several departments. As we've seen in the previous slide, it's much more than preparing a BOQ. You will find that you will need help and assistance and input from several departments within your company. That includes the legal department, the plant department, corporate planning, the insurance, the accounts, the health, safety and environment department, the engineering department, and the ISD, the information systems department. As an estimator or as a leader for this estimate, you will have to liaise and coordinate with all these departments at an early stage of the tender, provide them with the information they need in order for them to prepare the required information for the technical submission. This is just to show you, this is a photo of one of the tenders I've been working on recently, just to show that how a tender might look like, the tender submission just before it's submitted. Piles and piles of documents covering all the technical stuff we've discussed in the previous slide. Okay, now let's talk about the commercial and technical envelopes. There are mainly two options, let's say, or 2 ways of bidding in the Middle East, either the single envelope bidding or the 2 envelope bidding. In the single envelope bidding, usually the client tends to request contractors to pre-qualify for a tender at an early stage before floating the tender documents. Those who pass the pre-qualification process are then officially invited to purchase the tender documents and participate in this tender. For that, once the tender is floated and the successful bidders have bought the tender documents, They then submit both the financial proposal and the technical proposal in the same envelope, and the contract is awarded to the bidder whose bid has been determined to be the lowest evaluated substantially responsive bid. While on the contrary, the second type, the two envelope bidding, bidders submit two sealed envelopes simultaneously, one for the technical proposal and the other for the commercial proposal. The technical bid is opened first. Bidders who pass the first stage will have their commercial bids opened at a later stage. So this type of bidding, it's very common that not all bidders will have their financial envelope opened. Only those who pass the technical evaluation will have their financial submissions opened. I'll give an example in Muscat in Oman. The tender board there in Oman usually gives 70% for the technical submission and 30% only for the financial. Now, companies who do not pass the technical evaluation will not get their financial submission evaluated or opened. Okay, let's now just have a quick look at the process of the estimation. As we can see, it's a lengthy process that involves input from the several departments we've discussed in our earlier slides. The client, let's start from the extreme top left corner. The client floats a tender documents. You as a bidder receive them, and then comes the decisions of the top management on whether to bid as a standalone or a JV with another company. You then, as a bidder, give it a number, decide on who's going to be the estimate leader, and then go through the legal processes, pre-bid agreement, and so on. Let's go to this central and most important step, whereby the proposal leader coordinate and exchange information with all other departments, the 10 or 11 departments we discussed before. Then it goes for a pre-tender review, tender review board. Usually a few days before the submission, there's a big meeting whereby the top management attends, and they go through the main items of a tender and decide on the markups. Prepare proposal for the client. After this board meeting has been done and the markups are decided on, the estimator should be ready to close the tender and make it ready for submission and submit it. Okay, so what's a top sheet? For an estimator, the aim is always to arrive at a summary sheet which shows his direct cost, indirect cost, markups, escalation, and provisional sums and risks. This is a single sheet which the estimator aims at preparing. In other words, this is his duty during a month or 2 months of work is to prepare a summary sheet that shows all these costs. Now, if one day you become an estimation manager in charge of a group of estimators and each one working on his own estimate, This summary sheet or top sheet might be the only sheet that you will get the time to go through or to review. It has enough information for you as a manager to review, to spot check the work of your subordinate, just to maybe catch any mistakes that he might have, and judge how accurate, or let's say how correct, the estimate is. Okay, just to mention here that your total job cost is made up of your direct cost and indirect cost, while your total selling price is made out of your total job cost plus the markups and escalation. And finally, your total contract value is made up of your total selling price plus the provisional sums and risks. Okay. Now, um, let's go now through the estimate elements program. An estimate, a typical estimate, is made up of direct cost analysis, indirect cost analysis, and risk analysis. These are the main three elements in an estimate. Now, once you as an estimator receive the tender documents, you will start by coding the BOQ, giving similar BOQ items for similar BOQ items are given same codes. You then prepare what we call the work groups. We will go in detail through them in the next slides. Then calculate the operational rates, also referred to as complex resources by some estimators, and then pricing resources. While your indirect cost analysis includes elements like staff, site facilities, camp accommodation, and other costs like bank guarantees, insurance costs, financing costs, etc. Time-wise, you will find that you will spend most of your time on your direct cost analysis. This usually takes 4 to 6 weeks, while the indirect cost analysis takes a week or two, and finally the risk analysis takes another 1 to 2 days. This puts us at a typical tendering period of 8 to 12 weeks. Okay, let's start with the direct cost analysis. This is where we said you as an estimator are going to spend the majority of your time working on. There are three main reports that make up the direct cost analysis: the work groups, the operational rates, and the resources. Let's start with the work groups. Now, each work group is a BOQ item. Work groups aim at combining similar BOQ items in one group, thus single analysis, so that this will make things easier for you. Let's say you're working on a BOQ that is made up of a number of roads, let's say, and this BOQ is repeated for each and every road of these, call them 10 roads, for example. So when you give the same code for the repeated items, this means that you will have to analyze each of these items once only. Okay, so this in this report, there's plenty of quantity surveying work. So make sure that your quantity surveyor helps you here. It also requires thorough understanding of the preambles. As you might already know, preambles are those that come just before the BOQ and elaborate on what each BOQ item should allow for. Operational rates, this is where the real estimation work happens. Operational rates is all about productivities, activity durations, haulage calculations, concrete mix designs, etc. Resources, these are materials, plant and labor. This is where the work of your material engineer will be. He has to issue requests for quotations, study the received quotations he receives, make sure that all quotations are to specs. She should then prepare comparison sheets, decide on the best rate for each resource, which of course doesn't necessarily mean the cheapest. Plant hire rates are usually prepared by the plant department in your company. Labor wages are calculated by the estimator for each area or country. So if you work for an international company, this sort of area, labor wage, this sort of information, labor wages, should usually come from the area itself or from the country itself. So as we said, the four elements of direct cost are labor, material, plant, and subcontract. Okay. Let's have a look at the typical work group analysis. This analysis has been prepared using Candy software for estimation. It's a very popular and known software which I use in my estimates. Let's take an example for like this is a work group for road base 100 millimeter granular. So as you can see, this work group has been analyzed into 6 operational rates or 6 complex resources. Each of these operational rates is made up of resources which we will see in the next slide. So road base, if let's say you're on site and you want to construct this road base layer, 100 millimeter thick granular layer. So just think of it, what activities will you be doing in order to complete this layer? You need the material, of course. So we have here whole excavated material within site. This site example, has excess excavation, which could be used as a road base. So you can see here the estimator has allowed for hauling this material within site, and then producing subbase using this material. Of course, the stabilization of this road base, then laying it and compacting it. Of course, you will need water as well. So as we can see here, the work group has been broken down into 6 operation rates. Okay. So this is one of the operational rates we've discussed in the previous slide, laying of aggregate base course by payload. As we can see here, this operational rate has been broken down into resources. The resources here are mainly labors, operators, and plant. It's very important for the estimator to follow this sequence: work group, operational rates, resources. It's very important not to skip the operational rates and go directly to resources. Following this sequence, work group, operational rates, resources, will ensure that your estimate is neat and that it is easy to keep track of. Okay, now you'll see in the coming slides that this presentation focuses a little bit on road tenders. call it roads and bridges. So here we're gonna just talk a little bit now about calculation of haulages. If you're working on a road estimate, calculation of haulages is something that will be repeated um, in your estimate. We usually calculate haulages for suitable excavation to embankment, for borrow material to embankment, sub-base space within site, hauling asphalt to site, hauling concrete in transit mixers, etc. So let's take an example. Say we want to haul asphalt to site from an asphalt plant that is 20 kilometers far using tipper trucks of 15 cubes capacity each. We start by assuming a driving speed. Usually such tipper trucks loaded usually go on an average speed of between 20 to 40 kilometers depending whether the truck is loaded or empty. It also depends on whether it's driving on open roads with live traffic or within roads on site. So there are different and several factors that govern the speed that a tipper truck or trailer can go on. But for this example, we're taking an average speed of 30 kilometers an hour. So loading time, say 3 minutes to load this truck. Driving full for uh, for a distance of uh, 5 kilometers will give you 40 minutes. Sorry, we said 20 kilometers. So it's like 20 on for each way, going and coming back. So this is 40 kilometers. So you need 40 minutes to drive going, and then unloading another 10 minutes, driving back 30 minutes. This gives you a total of 83 minutes trip. We usually allow an extra 10% for the driver to rest and eat, etc. This gives you an additional 8 minutes, and the total becomes 91 minutes of trip. Now, assuming that um, working hours on site are 600 minutes, 10 working hours or 600 minutes, that means in a 10-hour day shift, and under these circumstances, your trucks can make 6 to 7 trips each, hauling 30 tons of asphalt. Okay, let's take an example of calculations for bridge formwork now. Calculations of formwork systems required depends on a number of factors, including the cycle per element, the duration available in the schedule for this activity, number of usages, and the resale value. Um, we have a table here for one of the estimates I've worked on recently, and here it shows how in the first column we've listed the formwork required for this project, and then we have the BOQ quantities in square meters, then the cycle in days. Then we have a column that we filled with the quantity to buy. Now this is an estimator's judgment or call here on how many square meters should be purchased for each item. Of course, depending on the factors we just mentioned, the cycle per day and the schedule and so on. Now, the material engineer should float inquiries in the market and get quotations for these types of formwork. So once you get unit rates for each item, you can then calculate the amount of formwork you will have to buy. Bear in mind that this amount does not necessarily mean that this is the cost to job, because you will eventually have a resale value for what you bought depending on the number of usages you will have. So I repeat here, the cost to job usually or in most cases is less than the amount bought because we have a resale value. But it's still important for us to calculate and know what's the amount we have to buy for, and that's in order for us to later on calculate our financing cost. Okay, let's have a look at the labor wages. As we said, labor is one of the four elements that make up your resources, let's say, or your direct cost. Now, it's very important when you calculate the labor wages to make sure that this includes for all the associated costs as per the country you're tendering for. Now, usually you get from the Ministry of Manpower for this particular country, you get a list of wages. Now, bear in mind that these wages you get do not include for all items. For example, it doesn't allow for indemnity, for leave days, for so on and so forth. Now, we'll go through this in detail in the next slide, but this is just to say that it's very important to multiply the wages you as an estimator get from the Minister of Manpower by an uplift factor. So what does this uplift factor include for? Okay. It includes for overtime hours, depending on the regulations in this country. For example, in this example we're taking here, we're assuming two extra overtime hours per day. Okay, the uplift on wages other than the overtime, it includes non-productive hours like Fridays, national holidays, Ramadan in the Middle East, inclement weather, sick days, transit days, ideal and non-productive hours. It also includes indemnity, notice pay, leave pay, social security, insurance, and so on. For example, in this example, we're arriving at an uplift factor of 1.5. In other words, the wages you get from the Ministry of Manpower have to be multiplied by 1.5 in order to arrive at the final uplifted labor wages. Keep in mind that those wages do not yet include the indirect costs, such as accommodation, messing, service costs, and so on. We'll go through these indirect costs later on in this presentation. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the plant. Once a draft direct cost is ready by the estimator, a plant list is usually prepared and sent to the plant department. Now, the plant department prepares a plant report which provides the estimator with information like the availability of each requested piece of equipment within the company's fleet, the monthly hire, fuel and oil rates per plant, and the maintenance crew required. Okay. Now, this plant list we're talking about, it usually shows the number of equipment at peak for each plant. Um, it also shows the indirect machines. Remember, as an estimator, you have to keep in mind that you need some indirect machines other than what is shown in your direct cost. For example, water tankers, flat trailers, and cranes. These are always required indirectly on site. Especially like when it's a road job, you need to make sure that it's not dusty. Therefore, you will need some months of water tankers. Some indirect means. Same principle is for the flat trailers and cranes. You will always need flat trailers and cranes on site um, to assist and help your direct man hours. So just keep that in mind. Always please allow for some indirect machines. Now make sure you use the correct fuel rate. Now in many countries in the Middle East, they have a number of rates for fuel depending on whether your company is a local company, a JV company, or an international one. So just make sure you're aware of these rates and make sure you're using the correct one. Also, make sure you compare the local hire versus your company's owned equipment. You'll be surprised sometimes that you can find um, local equipment at really good higher rates. Okay, so the rates that the plant department send you as higher rates, make sure you understand what do these rates include for exactly. Now, in the company I work for, the monthly hire rates include for depreciation recovery, interest cost, insurance and registration, tires, filters, and spare parts. All these are part of the plant's hire rate or the direct cost. Okay, that talks about the same stuff. This is part of the report that you as an estimator should receive from the plant department, and it shows all the costs we've discussed. Okay, let's go now to the third element of the resources, which is plant and subcontract. It's very important for your material engineer to prepare comparison sheets for the prices he receives from suppliers and subcontractors. This is the best way um, to reach conclusions on which supplier you're gonna use in your estimate or which price you're gonna use. Now, in terms of terminology, just it's very important to understand what your supplier or subcontractor is quoting for. So whenever you say the abbreviation CIF, that means it includes for cost of the material itself, plus insurance, plus freight. While you as an estimator have to allow for customs. While when it says CFR or C and F, this means it, in addition to the cost of the material, it includes for freight only. You as an estimator have to allow for the insurance and customs. Now, usually in the GCC, in the Gulf countries, the custom duties are 5%, while the insurance and other charges are another 2%. So these add up to around 7%. So it's very important for the material engineer working on the comparison sheets to double check and make sure that he's aware of the basis of payment because this will make a difference. Okay. Okay. Let's go now to the indirect cost elements. Let's start by your staff calculation now. So you've been working on your estimate for the last 2 to 3 weeks. You have now a draft direct cost analysis, and you're ready to start preparing your indirect cost analysis. One of the main and major indirect cost elements is monthly staff. Cost of monthly staff um, for medium to big size tenders is in the range of 7 to 10% of the total job cost. So it is a main and important element that you as an estimator have to make sure you calculate correctly. There are some rules of thumb for estimators to use. For example, a foreman, you need one foreman for every 30 laborers on site. Again, you need one general foreman for every 5 foremen, one site engineer for every 5 foremen, one section engineer for each 10 foremen, one project engineer for each 2 to 3 section engineers, and one construction manager for each 2 project engineers. These are this is like a guideline which we use in calculating our staff. But let's keep in mind that this is for a certain area or location, which is the Middle East. Now, when we go elsewhere globally, it depends on the caliber of your laborers on site in order to decide on the supervision required. So just make sure that this is in line with, as we said, the caliber of workers in the country you're working in. Now, you as an estimator, you come and you fill in the man hours calculated in your direct cost beside each work element. For it. So in this example, we can see here that the estimate has a total man hours of almost 4.5 million man hours divided over a number of activities: earthworks, subbase, curbs, pipelaying, and so on. So fill in the number of man hours for each category, and this table should give you the staff numbers you need for each element. Now again, as a rule of thumb, or let's say indicator, you should aim at a direct labor to staff of 7 to 1 or 10 to 1 at max. Okay, staff salaries calculation. Just let's keep in mind that each tender is a different case depending on location, duration of the project, whether it's standalone or JV, etc. A salary calculation is prepared for each tender to include for the associated costs, especially if you're tendering for different countries. Information on country-specific servicing costs are usually provided by the area personnel. So when you calculate the salaries for each of your staff categories, make sure you include for all associated costs on insurance, indemnity, bonus, car allowance, subsidies, fare tickets, accommodation, messing, and servicing costs. Okay, camp costs. Now, when your project is in a remote area, you will have to construct a camp for your laborers. A camp that can accommodate 2 or 3,000 laborers, of course, depending on your laborers at peak. In addition to laborers, you will also have to accommodate your staff members. That's, of course, when you're working in the deserts where there is no other permanent accommodation available. Make sure you calculate the number of units you will need them. Let's take this example, whereby there are different camp unit categories depending on the seniority of each staff member. So for example here, for every staff member who's equal or above band 14, he will get what we call an S1 unit. While those staff who are in bands 10 to 13 will get again an S1. Bands 8 to 9 will get an S2, and this unit is like the sort of unit where two staff members are in the same unit and share the same bathroom. S4 is given for staff of band 6 and 7. This is again a unit whereby four staff members share a toilet, and so on and so forth. So by preparing this table, you will get to know the number of camp units from each type that you will need to build your camp. Okay, you will have then to calculate your purchased cost of units and furniture. Once you know the number of the units you need, you will fill them here. Now your material engineer will get you quotations and prices for the buildings and for the furniture, which will enable you to arrive at total costs for the building, for the furniture, and the total here together in this example is just less than $3 million. The next step is to allow for depreciation. Now, we usually allow for depreciation on buildings for over 72 months or 6 years, while furniture is usually depreciated over 5 years or 60 months. This will allow you to arrive at a monthly cost or cost per month for each of the buildings and the furniture. So, for example, in this example, the buildings cost around $29,000 a month, while the furniture is $23,740 a month. Okay, make sure you allow some money for the external works. You will need to have external works to cover electricity, sewage, water supply, communications, so on. Now, when multiplying the buildings costs and the furniture costs by 30, which is the duration of the project, we are arriving here at a total of just a little bit less than $1 million. Of course, this includes also transportation of these units from the supplier to site. Okay, let's talk now about what we call a mass wall diagram. What's a mass wall diagram? A mass wall diagram is a tool showing the volumes of cut and fill along the profile of a road per kilometer. It is used to guide the estimator on the haulage distances of cut and fill. Let's say you're working on a 40-kilometer road tender, and the profile drawings that you've received from the client shows big areas of rock mountains that need to be cut. How will you, as an estimator, know the haulage distances of this material, this cut material that will have to be hauled for filling? you will have to use a Mass-Hall or prepare a Mass-Hall diagram. A Mass-Hall diagram enables you, as an estimator, to judge the haulage distance. So a Mass-Hall diagram actually shows cumulative quantities of cut minus fill versus the change. So here our x-axis is the cumulative cut minus fill, while our y-axis is for the road change. Okay, yeah, those who will attend the workshop with me will go through a full case study for an example on how to prepare a Mass-Hall diagram. Okay, so by that we've now covered most elements of the direct cost, which include the staff cost, the camp accommodation, and we will continue now and discuss how to prepare a cash flow. Now the aim of preparing a cash flow is to know how much financing cost you might need for this job. Now in order for you as an estimator to prepare the project cash flow, you must know what's your capital expenditure. To give you an example on that, the cost of purchasing formwork calculated in one of our earlier slides, this is a capital expenditure. The amount of money you will pay for constructing a camp on site is a capital expenditure. These are all expenses that you will pay before you start working. These are expenses that you'll be paying from day one before receiving any payment from the client yet, other than the advance payment. This brings us to the second point, which is the advance payment amount, which is usually, or let's say in the Middle East, it's a maximum of 10% of the contract price. You'll also have to be aware of your retention amount as mentioned in the tender document. Again, in the Middle East, this is in the range of around 10%. You will also have to know your payment conditions for monthly certificates. Like when is your certificate paid? So by preparing a simple cash flow, you as an estimator will be able to judge the financing cost required for the tender. Again, during the workshop, we will be preparing a simple cash flow with the aim of determining the cost of financing. Okay, now one of the indirect costs that you will be having in your project is the bank guarantees cost. Now, what bank guarantees do you have? An estimator usually allows for the following for the bank guarantees. The tender guarantee, it's usually required for 90 days or 3 months, and it's usually 1 to 2% of the tender value. The advance payment guarantee, this is required for the full project duration, and usually in the Middle East, in the Gulf countries, this is at 10% of the project value. Now, for the third type of guarantees, bank guarantees, is the performance guarantee. This is usually required up till the end of the maintenance period, and it's in the range of 5 to 10% of the project value. Now, finally, the retention guarantee. This is required for the project duration, and it's not applied in all projects. This is usually applied for half of the retention amount, i.e. 5% of the project value. Okay, so now, what's your insurance cost? Again, the insurance cost is one of the indirect cost elements. There are three main insurance costs known in the or used in the Middle East tenders: the car or the contractor's all risk insurance, the workman's compensation and employer's liability, and insurance on the temporary facilities. The insurance on the temporary facilities in the Middle East is usually around 3 per million per annum, which is the same percentage also for the contractors or risk or car. It's 3 per million of the project value. Okay, let's come now to the risks. We finished now the direct cost analysis and the indirect cost analysis. Let's take a fast look at what risks might be. Um, as an estimator, you have to think of a risk on whether it's a threat opportunity or opportunity, the probability of occurrence, and the impact on the project should it occur. Now, common risks in tenders are escalation on wages, materials, and plant hire rates, tight schedule, underestimated quantity, especially if it's a lump sum tender, rework issues, especially if it involves delicate concrete, like say bridges. It's very common or very possible for a contractor to do some rework on such sort of projects. And the final example of risk is the inclement weather. Now we have a case study 3, to calculate the risks for the mega reservoir projects in Qatar, and this is for those who will attend the workshop. Okay, let's have a look at what a joint venture tender might mean. Why would a contractor occasionally opt for a JV or a joint venture? It's usually for one of the following reasons. It's either that this contractor doesn't have the know-how, or the resources, or the infrastructure, or the capital to bid by himself, or to bid as a standalone. This is when he thinks of joining hands with a JV partner. Okay, a JV can do the needful without entering a never-ending partnership or shareholding scenario. Now, when you as an estimator are working on a JV tender, whereby you have a joint venture partner, it's very important here to make sure you prepare what we call the joint venture agreement. This is usually something that the client requests to be submitted within your technical submission. We'll see in the next slides an example for this joint venture agreement. Now, internally, you as an estimator will have to prepare a number of documents and share it with your JV partner in order to reach a conclusion that is accepted by the management of both companies. And now, the documents that you will have to prepare internally include key positions. This shows what are the key positions in the job and who will come from where. We'll see an example of that in the next slide. Now, also the companies of a joint venture will have to agree on the staff salaries. Each company will declare to the other parties of the JV what's their staff salaries. And finally, the plant hire rates. Again, each company within the joint venture declares the plant hire rate. Now, eventually, the JV partners should sit together before the tender submission and approve uh, this list of items, the key positions, the staff salaries, and plant hire rates. They should approve it and sign it so that it becomes binding should this JV win the tender in the future. Okay, so this is an example of a joint venture agreement as we discussed. Um, it's a 3 to 4 pages, a small one, not a big one, but there are certain elements that must be presented in this agreement. Now, the agreement, as we can see it in this example, has a date. It names the project. It's here, for example, this is a project in Qatar, and the title is Construction and Upgrading of the E-Ring Road. So it's not like a generic agreement. It's specific for this tender, showing the name of the project. It also declares percentages of the JV partners. For example, here you can see CCC at 50% and TCC at 50%. The agreement assigns a leader for the joint venture. So here you can see the leader is CCC. The joint venture agreement again lists the termination conditions. For this example, the termination conditions are A, failure of the parties to submit a bid to the employer. B, the contract is awarded to a third party. C, upon expiry of the validity period of the tender, unless extended by mutual agreement of the parties. D, the agreement is terminated by mutual consent of the parties. And finally, E, when 1 year from the date hereof, the tender is not awarded unless otherwise agreed. Now, of course, these are not set. Um, these can change depending on the country you're working in and other factors. Now, this JV agreement is eventually signed by both parties. This is an example of an organization chart for a project that is JV between two international companies, CCC, Vinci. As we can see, there are 10, or actually, sorry, there are 16 key positions, key staff positions. The tenderers sat together before the submission and they decided or agreed on each of these key positions and who will represent it. So whatever is in green, in blue, these are Vinci staff, while the staff in red are CCC staff. Okay, let's just go through the differences between a JV and a consortium. In the Middle East, JVs or JV tenders are much more common than consortiums. The main difference, let's say, between these is that in a JV, the parties um, work together and share responsibilities on site, whereby at the end, um, whatever profit has been achieved, it's divided equally between the JV partners, while if there was a loss, the loss is also divided equally between the parties. This is unlike a consortium, whereby in a consortium, each party or company works on its scope only, And at the end of the construction, um, you might end up having one JV party in loss while the other party has made profit. So it's like in a consortium, it's a completely divided site whereby each contractor has the opportunity to make a profit or otherwise or otherwise a loss.